What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Dr. Andrew Fix with Physio Room and joining you here on the code. Very excited to be bringing another awesome interview to you guys. I feel like it's been a while since I did an interview, but it's really only been a couple weeks. And we're being joined by Dr. Shuba Iyengar from San Francisco, actually joining us this morning. She's a practicing allergist and now the co-founder and chief medical officer for a company called Allermi. And Shuba, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, same to you. Well, what I would love to do for everyone that's so kind to join in, whether it's listening or video, and join us on the code, could you do us a favor and just more thoroughly introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and how you got into the field of working with allergies and helping all the people, so many people that suffer from them.
Absolutely. So yeah, my name is Shuba. I'm an allergist. I practice in the Bay Area. Yeah, and I've been here for about 10 years. I work in a practice out here. And yeah, I myself have horrible allergies. Uh, I'm on multiple allergy treatments. I'm on allergy shots. And so I really understand what it feels like to have really bad inflammation, like in your sinuses and sort of like all the stuff that goes with it. Yeah, I've been doing this now for a while. I've lived on the East Coast. I've lived on the West Coast. I trained in Boston. I grew up in Delaware, which is kind of random. A lot of people say that they've probably never even been there.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I'm a part of Allermi, which is a company that custom compounds nasal sprays for people who have really bad environmental allergies. And we'll talk about why nasal sprays are really important for environmental allergies. But I'm really passionate about it because, growing up, my dad had his own business. We didn't have much in the way of healthcare. And so it's really important for me to make healthcare and medical treatments accessible for people. I think it's really important. I remember what it was like to be on the other side of that. And
Yeah.
so with Allermi, we're able to do that. So we're all really passionate about doing that for people.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here. And I think we were just talking off air about this. So many people suffer from allergies like all throughout their life, right? Whether they're kids or whether they're adults, whether that's seasonal or something else. But out
Hmm.
here, so like you just sort of said, you've lived in different places. What we find is that allergies affect people differently in different places of the country or the world. And I feel like I notice it being more affecting more people out here in the Denver area compared to other places that I've lived.
Yeah.
um, so, I mean, I guess I would love to just start here on like, why is it that people suffer from allergies in the first place? Like, why do people have allergies from a bodily level? And then we can start to get into like, well, what do we do about it, pending what you're allergic to?
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah. So what happens when you have allergies, or we'll just say environmental allergies or pollen allergies, we'll focus on that,
Yeah.
is that you're breathing this stuff in and it causes the inside of your nose to get swollen at the very, very kind of like basic level that the inside of your nose is getting swollen because you're breathing in all this stuff and it's causing inflammation. But you can't notice it. You like don't notice it because you get by, like you can compensate. So if you can't breathe through one side of the nose, you'll just breathe through the other. And if you can't breathe through the other side, you'll start to mouth breathe. So sometimes at night, maybe your mouth gets like dry or you start to snore. But when that nose gets pretty swollen on the inside, there's a tube or a duct that goes to the eyes. That tube gets really swollen and the eyes get really, really itchy. And then the last thing that can happen for people is when it really gets swollen, um, all that mucus that wants to come out can't. So it starts to go backwards. And for some people, it
Mm.
goes down the back of their throat. Ha, ha, ha. They
Yeah.
end up with that tickle, or it goes in their sinuses and they get like headaches or they get sinus pressure. And so to get all that constellation of stuff better, you
Yeah.
have to get that cute little nose better and you have to get that inflammation to go down. And so most treatments that are really effective will work on the nose.
Mm. And that probably plays into, like you sort of alluded to, why nose sprays may be a very important, piece of the puzzle in getting things to improve because, so many of the over-the-counter allergy remedies that we have are, pills that we take or something. Um, and I have heard from so many people that like they've tried so many of those things and not seen significant results, and they sort of feel lost of what to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think the like the dilemma here is that you go to like Target or like Walmart or one of these stores and you go to the aisle. And first of all, it's super intimidating. Like I go there sometimes and I feel like I'm lost because there's
Yeah.
so much stuff and you don't know which one to
Right.
try. Um, and so there are different kind of like categories of things, right? Like there are the allergy pills like Zyrtec, Claritin, or Allegra.
Right.
Those will make you feel less itchy. Like
Mhm.
overall, you'll feel less itchy. Maybe you'll feel a little bit of a difference there, but they don't make the problem better because the problem is in
Mm.
the nose. So it doesn't really affect the nose. So even though you're using it and you find like it works for a little while, then it doesn't work anymore, and they have to switch to another one, and that works for a while, and you have to keep
Yeah.
switching. That's because it's not really treating the root problem. That's why you have to keep switching. Um,
Yeah.
so then, like, what's the next step, right? So you try these pills, they're not working. So then you try a nasal spray. And the most common nasal spray that people try is Flonase,
Flonase.
which
Right.
is not
Right.
my favorite because it's the most irritating of all the sprays. It has alcohol in it, so it's super irritating for the nose. And then I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, but it smells like flowers, which really kind of annoys me because if you're breathing, like if that's what you're like, you're allergic to nature. And like if that scent is going up your nose, first of all, it's irritating. And second of all, it's a little like disarming. Um, so so the second, like the other thing out there are the nasal sprays, like Flonase, Nasoport. These are what they call anti-inflammatory sprays. They're basically very diluted nasal steroids. For the most part, I don't want people to worry about the steroid part. Like a day of a steroid by mouth is equal to months of the spray. It's like really diluted. But because it's so diluted, when we use it by itself, it takes a while for it to have an effect. We almost always add on other sprays. So there are a bunch
Got it.
of different sprays that we can add on that we can talk about.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, and since you brought up, you know, some of these sprays being anti-inflammatories, let's maybe back up just a step and talk about, when you're breathing in these things, breathing in these particles from the environment causes inflammation within our nasal passageways. So like, what is inflammation? What is it not? If we just boil down, like what's happening from an inflammation standpoint in our body?
Oh, yeah. For allergic inflammation, what's happening is that all of us have what they call mast cells or allergy cells that are in our body.
Hmm.
And they kind of just hang out. Like they usually are pretty chill, but sometimes your body has like a kind of like a response that it shouldn't have. That's what an
Mm.
allergy is. An allergy is kind of like an overreaction to something. So your body kind of overreacts to the pollens
Mm.
that you're breathing in. And when that happens, those allergy cells start to get really activated or they kind of freak out. And now all of a sudden, and this is a very simplistic term, like a simplistic way of describing it. But all of a sudden, what's happening is those cells, they're starting to get activated and they're releasing all these chemicals that cause swelling,
Mm.
redness, congestion. And so that's why you see that constellation of things happening when you have like allergies or you have an allergic reaction.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. And I think I appreciate you doing that because I think the word inflammation gets thrown around for a lot of things. And, maybe the one thing everybody thinks about is swelling or something. But like you mentioned, when that's happening more like inside our body, as opposed to, we bang our elbow on something and it gets swollen, we don't always feel that happening or we don't always notice it as well. But it still has this cascade of effects that it causes. Um, and then, I guess one other question that comes to mind is the um, the allergies. I feel like I'm seeing more commercials about it. I'm hearing more people talking about it. Why does it seem like it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse every year, right? Like, I feel like seasonal allergies are just affecting people more, or someone who used to have what you'd call seasonal allergies. Now they just seem to be on allergy medication or be suffering from it all year round. Why does it seem like allergies just keep getting worse?
You know, I think that's a really tough question because
Yeah.
there's so many different things that are contributing to it. But I can just say, like, at the very height of it is probably, climate change, right?
Hmm.
With climate change, we're having warmer years. We have pollen seasons that have, you know, increased over the past, like every year, the pollen season gets, longer and longer and longer. So you have a longer season of pollination. And then on top of that, the pollen counts are like wacky. Like they go up really high and then all of a sudden it comes down really low. Like you were just talking about the weather in Denver
Yeah.
being like 65 and then all of a sudden it's like snowing 2 days later.
Right.
Like that wacky temperature is not something that nature likes, right? It's not something that it's used to. And so you're seeing these weird pollination patterns, and it's getting to the point where now it's like throughout the year in a lot of places, or much longer, especially in areas where you have like a freeze thaw cycle, meaning like you have like a proper snow, like a proper winter, and
Right.
then all of a sudden everything dies, and then everything like springs back up again, like grows back up again. And so the longer pollination seasons aren't helping. And then overall, like I think our body's inflammation, and this is just my personal sort of take on it,
Yeah.
is our body's inflammation is just, it's more now, right? With like all the processed foods that we
Hmm.
eat, like all the different, like maybe, you know, if you have young kids and you get sick a lot, your body's kind of more inflamed because you're getting
Yeah.
sick from all the stuff that they're bringing home from like preschool or daycare.
Yeah.
Um, so I think because accumulation of all of our inflammation is just higher, once that happens, once the inflammation is sort of at this baseline state, and you probably see this all the time, it's not much to make it worse. Like it doesn't
Right.
take much to make inflammation worse. It takes a lot to create it. But
Yeah.
once you get to that point where you're already inflamed, it doesn't take much more to make it worse. I think that kind of plays into allergies a lot. And that's why you're seeing a
Mm.
lot more allergies, or a lot sort of year-long allergies, and sort of more severe allergies are occurring now than they were in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think if we sort of like unpack that just a little bit, if anyone's listening to this show that has been a client in our office, particularly if they've had the opportunity to work with me, I talk a lot about this concept of our nervous system being sensitized, right? And our body, like you said, like our heightened sense of irritation or inflammation, and then the threshold for to set something off or to irritate something further being lowered when our nervous system is already kind of sensitized. And all of the things that you just started to allude to, we've had people on this show where we've talked about nutrition and all the processed foods and how those are not obviously very good for us, and how that can impact our body. We've talked about sleep a lot on this show. And, I think it's safe to say, at least from my experience being a new father, well, that's definitely one thing that can reduce your sleep is having young kids. But I think people just in general now in 2024 are getting less sleep than we have in the past because we are constantly active and engaged, whether it's through computers, phones, televisions, with our environment from like a social and a screen standpoint, instead of just going to sleep when the sun sets and waking up when the sun rises, like we used to do many years ago. So when we're sleeping less, well, that's going to cause an effect on our nervous system and it make it easier for our body to have inflammation and be less resilient to that because we're not recovering and repairing as well as we could have. So that all makes great sense to me. And I think fits in really well with, the types of conversations we've had on this show before. So I guess,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I guess where we go from here is, okay, climate change is happening, pollen seasons are being extended, or we're seeing changes there, and we live in a world where because of things like processed food, less sleep, what we just talked about, we're more susceptible to spikes in inflammation. So then what do we do about it?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. From an
Hmm.
allergy standpoint, like getting your allergies better is helpful. Like trying to get so a lot of time when people see me, like as in my clinic, they're really swollen on the inside of their nose, but they really can't tell. And that's a lot of that is because, you can compensate. Like we said, like if you can't breathe through one side, you'll breathe through the other side. If you can't breathe through the other side, you'll mouth breathe. And so a lot of sleep issues actually have a lot to do with allergy
Sure.
because what's happening is because your nose is so swollen, your mouth breathing, that's causing you to snore at night or breathe through your mouth at night. And then you just don't, you wake up or you're head choking, and so you don't feel like you sleep as
Hmm.
well. So,
Right.
and that can even make you more susceptible to allergies, like what you
Hmm.
just said. But definitely getting the nose better is going to be helpful in bringing down inflammation so that you're not as sensitive to like perfumes or
Yeah.
certain foods making your nose more congested, or even when you get sick with a cough or cold, when you have allergies on top of that, and you're sick, your nose is already swollen, but when you get sick, it swells shut. And then all that mucus that wants to come out can't, like what we talked about, it goes on the back of your throat. You end up with like this cough that lasts like weeks and weeks. And so
Mm,
people always, they're like, oh, is it allergy or is it that I'm sick, that when I get sick, it lasts so long? What is it? Is it the virus or is it allergy? It's actually both, because the allergy is making you already inflamed, and then it kind of goes over the top when you get sick with a cough or cold. And that's what's creating that
mm.
prolonged cough or getting sick for weeks at a time. So treating the allergies and making the nose better really helps.
Yeah, getting down to the root cause, like you sort of mentioned. So then, what I guess in your experience practicing, could people expect if if they're listening to us talk and they say, "Hey, well, I think I feel some of these things, but I've never really thought that I had allergies. Maybe I should get checked out by somebody for this, by an allergist."
Yeah.
What would their normal expectation be like if they went to their local allergist? And then how does Allermi compare or differ from that?
Yeah, such a good question. So normally, if you come to me, I would say, oh, we talk about what's going on. I take a look up there, see see if you're inflamed. And then we talk about like what is the best thing to treat the nose, right?
Mm,
Based on like what you're telling me with your symptoms and how long things have been going on. And so, as we talked about, like the best medicine to make this better is always going to be a nasal spray, but there are different ones out there. And then the most common we talk about, like Flonase, Nasacort, those are the anti-inflammatory sprays. They're very diluted nasal steroids. Again, we don't want to worry about the steroid part because they're pretty diluted. But because they're so diluted, they take a long time to have an effect. So when you use them, like you go to the store and you get like Flonase or Nasacort, and you use it by itself, it doesn't feel like anything's happening because it's so slow. And so
mhm.
that's why if you see me in the office, I would add on sprays. And so sometimes we'll add on something called azolastine, which is an antihistamine spray. It's
Mhm.
kind of like Zyrtec or Claritin, which you've seen at the store, but it's just for the nose. And because it's just for the nose, it works better. It has less side effects because it just goes to the nose. And so we combine those two. And then sometimes we'll add on other sprays too. Like
Mhm.
sometimes we'll add on a spray to open up the nasal passages. We can dilute out decongestants. Sometimes use something called ipratropium, which also works on the blood vessels to help with the runny nose. So usually I'll literally have people line their sprays up by their toothbrush, one after the other, and they do one after the other. And the combination of sprays depends on why they've come to see me and what their symptoms are. And
Right.
so at Allermi, what we've been able to do, which is awesome, is that we're able to take all those different medications and combine it into one spray. And we can
Ah.
even go next level, which is we can control the amount of the different ingredients that we're using depending on what you tell us about what your symptoms are. So we can
Mm.
put more of one thing in and less of another thing in. And that combination is unique to you. Everyone has their own combination, and it depends on what they're telling us and what their symptoms are. And so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you're creating that special concoction for that person instead of just prescribing all the same things for everybody.
Yeah, and then you go to Target or Walmart or any of these drugstores, and you're literally walking out of there with like everything is so expensive, right? You walk out and it's like 50, $60 later. And so we really try to come up with a good price point of $35, which is, literally that one bottle has like multiple different ingredients. And then we always use a saline spray with it, which kind of keeps the nose nice and moist so that when you use the medication, it doesn't like dry out your nose. And so a lot of thought has been put into it because we know what's worked and what hasn't worked for people in the past because we've been doing this for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, for that price point or for like what the average client or consumer is dealing with, is that something that they're generally going through over a 30-day period, like a 1 month time, or depends on the person?
Yeah, I mean it depends on the person to some extent, but for the most part, it's usually like a month. Like
Yeah.
one bottle will last 1 month.
Hmm. Now,
Yeah.
do you see on average, like when you guys start working with somebody and you prescribe them like their combination of medications in their unique spray, that they use it more frequently early on when they're getting started, and then they have the ability to potentially like wean down some in the future, or are people pretty much just using it consistently daily?
Yeah, I can tell you from my own clinical experience and with Allermi, like it depends on the person and it
Hmm.
depends on the time of the year, right?
Sure. Right.
Because this time, like this is spring, right? We're going into the high pollen season. And
Hmm.
so for the most part, like I tell people, like you're probably going to need to be on something at least once a day until like the end of August, depending
Yeah.
on where you live, right? But most people, it's like the end of August.
Sure.
And so, yeah, in that case, yeah, they probably do use it every day and sometimes twice a day too. A lot of people use it twice a day. That's our standard dose is twice a day. But everyone's a little different. So usually I always say start out more in the beginning, like we talked about, bring that inflammation down. And then once that inflammation is down, like at least do it once a day, but see how you do. Maybe you can get by with once a day. Maybe even like after August, you can get by with every other day. Everyone's a little different. And I
Sure.
never know where they fall on that sliding scale. And so we
Hmm.
just have to kind of test it out. So if you go down and then you start to feel worse again, go back up. We're just trying to figure out like what's the least amount of medicine for you.
Right. Yeah. What's that minimal effective dose that results in the effects or the outcome you're looking for without overdoing it? And I think that's pretty much true of all the things that we talk about, of whether someone is exercising and participating in fitness in order to build muscle and get stronger is going to take a different intensity and prescription than someone who already has reached that point and now they're just looking to maintain. Or someone who's trying to lose weight is going to have to go into more of a calorie deficit than someone who's just looking to maintain a weight that they've reached. So that all makes good sense to me. I think thinking back, on times that I have suffered from environmental allergies that I like really noticed in my life, and I originally am from the Midwest in Wisconsin.
Oh,
I had
cool.
a clinical rotation while I was in school, and that was during the springtime, like March and April, in sort of the northeastern section of South Carolina. And then I actually lived in the very southeastern portion of North Carolina, right across the border. And the
Oh,
pollen
cool.
there that year was just more than I've ever experienced in my life. Like it was where like if you left for the day and you left the windows open, even though you have the screens there, you come back in the afternoon and there's just like pollen everywhere, or it's just on the side of the roads. And that was really the time in my life where I had to go, like you said, go to the store, and I left with one allergy medication, didn't feel like that was working, went back a week later, got a different allergy medication, um, because I had never experienced that quite as much before living in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I lived in North Carolina too. And I was not on any allergy medicines. Like I didn't know what I was doing, I think,
Yeah.
because I was in medical school. And so I really suffered there because yeah, they have a lot of flora,
Hmm.
a lot of trees, a lot of grasses. The Bay Area too, like where I live now is pretty special because
Yeah.
it's a temperate climate. And so there's so many different species of trees, and so that really gets people too. But yeah, when you're not treating your allergies well, it really affects your life. Like it affects the way you sleep. You just don't, and now at post COVID, like if you sneeze or you're rubbing your nose, people look at you differently, right? It's
Yep.
not like the same grace period that you had before. And now everyone's like, oh, what's going on
Mhm.
with you? You need to do something about this.
Yeah, it's totally true. We were just talking about that, myself and a client who's also a family member. We were talking about, if you feel a little bit sick now, we think very differently about that than we did prior to 2020, when like, normally people would go to work if they're feeling like a little mild cold, or, clients and customers would still go in to wherever they're going. And they say, "Oh, it's just a minor cold." Now it's like, if you're feeling something, just stay home, right? Like we don't want
Yeah.
to share that with other people. So based on what we were just talking about different areas that we've lived, are there trends that you see in your field of like where do people live in the country or in the world who tend to suffer from worse seasonal and environmental allergies than others, like in certain parts?
I mean, you want to say the perennial states, what they call perennial, meaning like where it pollinates like most of the year, like
Hmm.
a lot of like the West Coast, a lot of the South, the warmer places where the pollen counts are pretty much like kind of mid-level to high most of the year. And so, yeah, a lot of people suffer year round there. But, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Delaware, and like my allergies were horrible. I mean, even though it wasn't like we had true like winter, like it rained, it snowed in the winter and it rained most of the spring. But like when that pollen came out, like, April, May, June, July, August, September, I was miserable. So
Yeah.
like the pollen counts were higher because now everything is died and now it's like flourishing, like it's growing.
Regrowing.
And so it's
Mhm.
like a different kind of suffering, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you got a little bit of a reprieve from it, and then it comes back every year like with a vengeance instead of just kind of staying consistent throughout the
Yeah.
year.
So it's just a different kind of suffering or
Hmm.
misery, I guess, depending on where you live and how sensitive you are.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Do we have any bit of like an understanding or a concept of, obviously everyone is different, right? And we look different, we have different features and everything, but like why some people suffer so much more than other people, and why like one person might have bad allergies and one person doesn't seem to notice any sort of allergic reaction to things?
That's also a really, because there's so many variables that go into
Yeah.
why we have inflammation, why we get pollen allergies. Some of it is just the sensitivity to inflammation, right? If you already have other inflammatory triggers that are going on in your body, like you have autoimmune issues
Hmm.
or you have chronic inflammatory diseases like heart diseases or GI diseases, that's already at baseline going to make you more inflamed. And so
Yeah.
maybe to some extent, maybe you're more susceptible to inflammation in general. But also, sometimes it's also anatomy, right? Like
Hmm.
the way your bone structure is, the way your sinuses are shaped, the way your nose is. Do you have a deviated septum? All of that can make things more prone to getting clogged, right? Because ultimately, you can always be inflamed, but maybe you don't notice it because your nose is like just shaped in such a way that it always just stays open. But if you have like, like certain features such that like everything when it gets swollen up here, everything that can't come out gets funneled into a very small space,
Yeah.
then really notice it a lot. So a lot of times I see groups of people where they have like really narrow passages here and it
Mm.
like all that mucus gets like funneled into like a very small space and then they can't breathe or they're choking or they can't eat properly and that really affects them more than maybe say someone else whose anatomy or their the back of their throat or their sinuses are shaped differently.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense because, we see the same thing in our field, right? People with different anatomy tend to have trends toward different sort of body mechanical issues, like injuries and things that they suffer. Um, and of course, based on the activities that people do. But
Yeah.
um, what about what about sort of like the age range? So, do you, in your practice, do you guys end up seeing more like kids and adolescents, more adults? Like, what are sort of the trends you're seeing in terms of like who is suffering from allergies?
Yeah, it's non-discriminatory,
Yeah,
right?
right, sure.
Allergies pretty
Hmm.
much affect everybody. We don't really see it as much in like young babies, although I have to say I've been seeing that more. Our company, Allermi, with the customized nasal sprays, we are only serving 18 and older right now. I
Got it.
think
Yep.
eventually we'll definitely go down, but right now we're doing that age group. But in my clinic, I see young kids, I see like teenagers, I see older people, and so it's at all age ranges. And, some of them do end up on allergy shots. And
Mhm.
especially allergy shots are when we mix up everything people are allergic to and they get small amounts of it, but it's a commitment, right? It's
Right.
once a week for 6 months to build up to a top dose. And then it's once a month after that for about 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
But for the most part, it cures a lot of people, especially the young kids, because their immune system is so dynamic. So for kids, like usually it depends on the kid, but usually after like 6 to 8 months, I can cut their meds in half or they can go
Got
off
it.
of them completely. And usually after 3 to 5 years, they're done. With adults, the immune system is not as flexible. So you kind of have to double everything. Like it takes like a year for them
Yeah.
to really get better to cut meds. And then usually they need it for like 5 to 7 years.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, I really see it in all age ranges.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, feel like this might be like a little teaser of an episode that it's not even recorded yet, but we're going to be doing a conversation on in all different facets of our life, the cost of procrastination. And like you just said,
Hmm.
the body is more adaptable and the immune response is more adaptable in younger people than the older we are. So, the sooner you address something, the easier it is typically to address because your body has compensated less for the things that you've been dealing with, whether that's an orthopedic
Yes,
issue in our office or whether that's an allergy issue in your office, or whether that is something, brain and mental, and we know about the neuroplasticity of the brain. Everything's
sure.
easier the younger that we are. So,
I know, but
yeah,
it's okay if we're still getting older. We're wiser, right?
totally. Yep, yep. You just don't know what you don't know. Um, well, as we're having this conversation, I guess I'd like to ask you, being the expert, what have we missed? Have we skipped over any piece of this puzzle or any piece of this conversation that like I'm not sure what some of the most common questions you get from clients are about allergies or about what they should do about things.
Yeah, I can tell you some of the common things people come to me with, and they don't really like if they don't associate it. Like a
Yeah.
lot of people come to me with like eye issues, right?
Mm.
They have like either like dermatitis or like eczema around their eyelids, or they come to me with like really itchy eyes, and they're like, "Oh yeah, which eye drop should I use?" And I'm like, okay, look, I want you to understand why this is happening because it's not the eye drops. You can use them and they will make you feel better for a couple hours, like make your eyes feel less itchy, but they're not treating the root cause because the root
Yes.
cause is in the nose.
Thank you.
So a
Yeah.
lot of people who have allergies in their eyes don't really understand that what's happening is that inflammation has gotten so bad that it's traveled up their nasolacrimal duct to their eyes, and
Mm.
now their eyes are so itchy. And if I just get the nose better, I get the eyes better. So when I try it, when I try to tell them, well, yeah, we can just, we can use nasal sprays for this. They kind of look at me funny and they're like, "Are you sure?" Because I've been using eye drops and that doesn't make sense to me. And so when I explain it to them and they kind of understand it and they use it, like 90+% of the time, they're better.
Yeah, I
So
love
that's one
that.
thing I definitely hear a lot about.
Yeah, and we see that so often in our office or just in physical therapy in general. Somebody has been spending quite a long time treating a symptom. Tight hamstrings is a very common example that we use, and they're stretching and they're stretching and they're stretching, but those that tightness in your hamstrings is not going away. So what I tend to find is the longer somebody has been trying something, but they still have the symptom, the easier it is to get them to understand, hey, this is not treating the root cause of the issue. That's why it has not gotten better. Probably a little bit harder to have that conversation and have them firmly grasp it if they just started feeling that symptom, because they haven't experienced the like failure of it to improve with the treatment approach they've been trying. But yeah, that is
So
that
what's the
is
solution? Because I have that issue.
so yeah, and I think if I'm not mistaken, I think we did an episode like sort of where I talked about this with about a client we've been working with. Most often, when you are feeling chronic tightness in an area, especially if you've been trying to stretch it and stretch it and stretch it, and it is not going away, that is typically an indication that the solution is stability and stabilization. And the reason that the body um, has that tone or that tightness in the first place is because our nervous system, all the nerves, spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves that come out, ultimately are what tell the muscles what to do. And at the end of the day, the brain controls all of this, right? If the brain and the nerves aren't functioning, then the muscle's not going to fire and function. All of the muscles in our body have jobs that they're responsible for, holding things stable, moving certain parts of our limbs. And if that muscle isn't strong enough to do its job, the nervous system still has the ability to tell that muscle what to do. So we call that guarding or tone. So if the body's craving stability, the brain and the nerves are going to find a way to try and make that happen. And they're just going to tell that muscle to hold more tone or tension so that it can do the job that it's responsible for. But then when we feel that, right, as the person or the client in this case, when we feel that something is tight, we want to stretch it out, right? Like we want to lengthen it. And that is a very temporary, fleeting solution. Because if you stretch something, it probably feels a little bit better for a little while. And then the next day, it probably feels tight again. But if
So I
stretching
need to
and
do more strength training. That's what you're
probably
telling
so,
me.
most likely. And when we're talking about the hamstrings, we often end up tracing things back up to the hips, the pelvis, and the lumbar spine. When we're talking about our our traps up here on the top of our shoulder, we often end up tracing things up to the neck. Like, where do these muscles get innervated by? Where do they ultimately come from, and where does the support come from? What levels of the spine? So yeah, stabilization is typically the root cause. Something needs to be stronger, and then that usually resolves the problem more long term because we're addressing the root cause.
Okay, good. So I did boot camp this morning, so that counts for something.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, and I would say, you know, just while we're on the topic, I would say way more often than not, when someone comes into our office with, we'll call it tightness, we're typically prescribing more stability exercises than mobility exercises.
Ah,
Not that
okay.
people don't need mobility, we definitely do, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, we end up prescribing more stabilization things because a lot of people have sedentary lives, sedentary jobs, and we need, as our world becomes more convenient and things become easier for us, we're not challenging our bodies as much unless you are intentionally participating in some sort of exercise and strength training, because we just don't have to do it throughout our day very much. Suitcases have wheels on them and we drive everywhere instead of walk. So, um, we just need to make a point to keep ourselves strong.
Yeah. Good.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for
Yeah, absolutely.
the tip
Thanks for
or
the question.
tips.
What else? What other common questions do you get? So you mentioned folks will come in sometimes, they have symptoms in the area of their eyes, whether that's itching or swelling or something, some sort of symptoms. And then we try to find the root cause. Oftentimes that's the nose, and we address that. What are some of the other common, like another really common scenario or common question that you get asked?
Yeah. So another thing that people don't always understand is that this can make this worse. And so a lot of times when you get this inflammation up here and all that mucus starts going on the back of your throat, it's all one airway. We call it the one airway hypothesis. So it gets inflamed up here, and then all of a sudden it goes down here and you can't
Yeah.
breathe.
And for those of you
And
guys that are
so,
listening, what Shuba just said is like, the nose symptoms, the sinus symptoms can make the chest and the lung area get worse.
yes. And so you end up going, let's say you don't, you get sick and it's lasting a long time and you're coughing. And so you go to the urgent care or you go to the ER or see your doctor and they prescribe you inhalers,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And the inhalers make this better, and you should use them to make this better. But if this is what's making this worse, this is going to come back again. And
Mm.
so, what I see a lot is a lot of people on inhalers for long periods of time, and they're like, "Oh, I need it all the time. Can you prescribe this for me?" And I'm like, "Well, why are you needing this? Like, is this making this worse?" And I'm not saying that everyone has this extension of inflammation, that one airway hypothesis, but a lot of people do. And sometimes if I just get the allergies better up here, it prevents this from happening and I can
Yeah.
peel off the inhalers.
Yeah,
So
that
getting the nose
one.
better gets this better and then it gets this better. And so that's really helpful because a little bit of a nose spray can like prevent them from needing inhalers for some people. And that's super helpful.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big deal too, because I feel like also compared to when I was younger, I don't remember this as often, like unless someone truly had asthma or something, but like I don't remember as many people being on inhalers as I see now. Like I see that being very common where, someone is going to exercise, but first they take an inhaler and you ask them, oh, do you have asthma? And they say no, right? It's some other reason that they're using an inhaler. I think that is such a common thing that people are dealing with. So that's, hearing you talk about if we can address that root cause up in the head, in the face, the nose, the sinuses, to potentially remove the need for that inhaler. That'd be great.
Yeah. And it's not the same for everyone. Maybe
Hmm.
not everyone has that trigger that's up here, but for a lot of people, it is, especially if you're exercising outside and you find that your symptoms are worse,
Hmm.
or when you get sick, it's lasting longer than a week. Like there are definitely groups of people that where their upper airway inflammation is creating lower airway inflammation.
Yeah, yeah, that makes good sense. Well, why don't we do this? I know that you and I both have meetings coming up here. I want to make sure that the folks that are here listening to us know where that they can find out more information, right? Where we'll put this stuff in the show notes, but I'd love for you to share it anyways. Like, what are going to be the best ways for people to get in touch with you, your team, learn more about Allermi? Where can people find you guys online?
Yeah, we're online. We're under www.allermi.com, Allermi, like allergy, but Allermi. So
Hmm.
it's Allermi. And we have a lot of educational content because it's really important to us that people learn and understand about allergies because we're all in the same boat. We're all suffering from this stuff. So yeah, definitely check us out. We have a lot of different, every week we put out new content on different allergies that are going on across the US, different ways to deal with allergies. Obviously, treating the nose is helpful, but we talk about other things too, things that you can do in the home to help with your allergies. So yeah, we have a very holistic approach to like how to help yourself feel better.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And it fits in great with all the stuff that we want to talk about on the show. Like, this whole health, whole picture kind of wellness, not treating symptoms, but addressing the root cause. So I encourage you guys
Absolutely.
to check out that website, go find these guys online on social media, wherever it is that you want to connect. And we'll put that stuff in the show notes. Of course, reach out to them directly with questions. But if you also find our information here on the show and you want to send me an email or post a comment or something and you have questions, we'll be sure to pass that over and connect you guys so that you can get your questions asked and answered. Um, but unless there's anything else, Shuba, I really appreciate you joining this morning on the show and talking to us.
Oh yeah, no, thank you for having me. It was lovely to meet you. Congratulations on your new
Oh,
little one.
thank you so much. Yeah, yeah. I think some of you guys on the code know Aaron and my wife had a new little boy. As of the recording of this, he's 5 weeks old. So time really does fly. So make sure you soak it up the best that you can. And, if you have allergies, make sure you get those addressed to the best of your ability so that you can enjoy a quality life and do all the things that you want to do without being held back. You guys have probably heard this before. If you've tuned in, if you've not already left us a review on the code, that would go a long way. We do have a goal. We're trying to get to 200 five-star reviews on this show so that we can just get it out to more and more people and spread the word with all these awesome interviews and guests that we have. So for all of you guys that tuned in, thank you so much for listening to us. And again, Shuba, I hope you have an awesome rest of your day and really
You
appreciate your
too.
time this morning on the code.
Nice to see you. Yeah, you too. Have a good rest of your day. Enjoy your little guy.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, guys. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Code.
Okay.